This week, Faru Mavatuna talks about CI-level automated web security in our interview segment. In the enterprise security news, a new one-login study, Flexera and Microsoft join forces. The Eastern Institute of Technology has published a study. Power Broker for Windows 7.3 updates, security hygiene, malware injection to stop lateral movement, SANS incident response survey results, and more. And in our technical segment, I'm going to do a little thing about Docker and talk about it in the light of security folks who may not have played with Docker yet, where your opportunities are for improving your system hardening platforms. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The teleprompter now has artificial intelligence, Doug, and updates itself. It's awesome. This week, and talk about them as it relates to enterprise security. You're going to do great.
I think that people think that you and I talk like every day at night. You know, It's like, hey, what are you doing? It's kind of a bit of an exhausting week. And I think that we noticed that a little bit in the stories for this week as well.
Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. IT Pro TV, an easy, entertaining approach to online IT training. Stream over 2,000 hours of up-to-date, high-quality video content live and on demand. Premium annual memberships include all video content as well as access to virtual labs and the Q&A forums. You'd pay $85.70 a month or $857 per year, but we have a special offer for our listeners. For a free 7-day trial and 30% off the lifetime of your active subscription, visit itpro.tv/enterprise security and use the code ES30. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 53 of Enterprise Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined on the lines via Skype by Mr. John Strand. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back. I don't know. I think I've missed 2 episodes just due to the 4th of July weekend, camping and vacations. So it's really, really fantastic to be back.
And you were apparently busy installing some more soundproof foam as well.
Yeah, because if you look at the teaser before the show starts, we had one. Now we have an entire room dedicated.
It's like multiplying.
So like full-on studio foam now, nice. Because studio foam is the way to go.
That's awesome. Quick reminder, IT Pro TV's courses now include Computer Hacking Forensic Investigator V9, Kali Linux CompTIA A+ 901, and Accelerated CompTIA Security Plus. Premium annual memberships, of course, include all video content, as well as access to virtual labs and Q&A forums. For a limited time, you get 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. Go to itpro.tv/enterprise security and use that discount code ES30. On to the enterprise security news for today. And this first story, John, it leads in with a question, because OneLogin obviously makes, single sign-on type solutions. Mm-hmm. And they did a study that businesses are vulnerable to data breaches from former employees. I wanted to ask you, how much do you respond to incidents or hear about former employees doing bad things versus external attackers?
I'm not going to say it's not a problem, because we've had a number of incidents over the years where you have had a former employee that's tried to do damage to a company. There's one particular case that just burns in my memory for a long, long time. He was a systems administrator. He was busted. Trying to go to IRC channels for snuff, child pornography, things like that. And whenever we finally got him in the room with the FBI and we started talking with him about what other access he had to the network, because he was a lead systems administrator, he had like 14, 15 other accounts that he had set up in the organization. It was kind of terrifying to see that. It was kind of my first introduction to this. However, former employees coming back and doing damage is one thing. The other thing is stale accounts, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why
Yes.
we really like the process of, if an account hasn't been logged in like a month, lock it out. Just suspend the account.
Right.
And for that reason, we don't see a lot of stale accounts that aren't being used that we use to actually leverage and gain access to networks, because a lot of the existing policies are in place. Once again, not saying it's not a problem. I'm just saying we have a lot of existing controls that we see that take care of this issue. But yeah, the former employee, like I think there was the guy worked for San Francisco, I believe,
Yes.
that actually held parts of the city kind of for ransom. I mean, it is a problem without question.
I've always deemed it as less frequently occurring. However, when it does occur, the damage meter is like off the charts.
Absolutely. I remember there was one incident that happened. It wasn't really an incident. It was like 6 years after I left working Accenture. And one of the customers that I worked with, they called me up and they said, "Hey, do you happen to remember the password for root on the vulnerability assessment scanning box?" And I'm like, well, two questions. One, you haven't updated the vulnerability assessment scanner in 5 years. And two, please tell me it's not this password. I gave them the password and they're like, "Yeah, that's it. Thank you." And I was just horrified. So we see that a lot more in Linux-based systems than we do on Windows-based systems.
Flexera has partnered with Microsoft, and it's interesting. So Flexera actually does software inventory for Microsoft as well.
Which is kind of interesting. I mean, so some people I think would question, Paul, whether or not this is a security relevant issue. And I think it absolutely is, right? Whenever you're looking at organizations that have licensing, it is absolutely a security issue if all of a sudden you get audited by Oracle or Microsoft or Cisco, and they find out that you have hundreds of licenses that your developers are handing out like candy, and you've only paid for one. That can absolutely hurt an organization. So I think it's kind of an interesting approach. Of course, immediately I jumped into this could be used for audit as well, to try to see how many systems you have and see if anything's kind of dropping off the face of the planet for as far as vulnerability scanning.
Oh, so that's interesting. I wasn't aware of how much of the distinction there was between the two solutions that Flexera offers. I was thinking of it that companies that develop software, they obviously have protections such as the Internet of Things, I think is a great example, right? Because I've got firmware that's running like the first version of PHP ever, and I got to go find that. And that software does that. And then Black Duck is in a similar kind of space, and there's others in the space as well. But the solution for enterprises that you were talking about, John, right? Ensure compliance, set up an enterprise app store, assess application compatibility. That's really cool too. Because like you were saying, you got to know what software you have and are you in compliance with the licenses, for example.
And if you look at almost any audit and compliance framework, Paul, all of them start with know what you have. I mean, that's where you have to begin. Like you said, if you're using PHP version 1, that might be an issue. But have an idea of what you have and what it is you're actually protecting is step one every time.
Tanium has announced a new way to ease the pain of EDR investigations.
Wow.
I'm struggling with this one because they really just kind of go through a pick list of stuff that most endpoint, like detect indicators of compromise, do reputation information, out-of-the-box intelligence feed of signals, apply common uses of Tanium sensors to detect suspicious endpoint activity. And it sounds like endpoint getting more into the details of security, whereas before they largely position themselves as partnering with security-type vendors and feeds and aggregating that information. Maybe they're still doing some of that, of course, but...
And remember, whenever you're a product like this, if you're partnering with people and then all of a sudden they move into this space and you decide not to, then you're giving your competitors a wedge to come in and take your market share from you. The one thing that concerns me about this, though, is Tanium is one of those vendors that we do see quite often in our assessments. And they're very, very good at what they do. They're easy to deploy, and they're wicked, wicked fast. So my fear is, you look at Carbon Black, and Carbon Black did what Carbon Black did, and it does it very, very, very well. And then all of a sudden they're trying to get into all these other areas. And yet there are vendors like Red Canary that ride on top of Carbon Black and do that type of analysis and detecting breaches better than Carbon Black does. So one of my concerns is, will Tanium actually lose focus on what it is they're doing and doing very, very, very well by trying to expand these other offerings? They're greatly, greatly positioned to be able to do these other things. It's just, I think, like you, I get a little bit queasy easy whenever a company's like, we're doing, we got granular role-based access control, we do IOC detection, we're now doing all of these other things, and every one of these different new capabilities that they're rolling in their threat response package, every one of them is really, really hard. And I have a little bit of worry about companies that are just throwing this crap together just to make sure that they're using it as a stopgap to stop other vendors from moving into this space.
Acunetics, it looks like this study is very specific to Acunetics, Eastern Institute of Technology.
It really wasn't, but they talked about a lot of scanners.
Oh, okay. So the full case study has a lot of scanners. Acunetics basically makes it sound like they only evaluated Acunetics. Do you find, and Pharaoh's on the show today as well from NetSparker, one of our sponsors, and be interesting. Of course, we've talked with Pharaoh quite a bit about the enterprise application usage of automated web app vulnerability scanners. Do you see these in use, John, a lot? Do you see people using them effectively?
Yeah, you do whenever they're actually setting them up. And by the way, I was wrong. This paper only talks about Acunetics. And oddly enough, it looks like it's a college level like intro to information security paper. It's not really all that. They really should not have linked to this paper. But the concept of actually using these scanners is something that's very, very, very important. And I think we have something a little bit later that ties into this, where we're talking about the Grammatech article. We can see this maturity curve. And we can kind of maybe couple these two together. We can see the maturity curve of organizations that are actually doing source code analysis, doing dynamic code analysis. But there is still a tremendous, tremendous amount of organizations that are doing neither. They get to the end of development and they say, hey, we need to have a pen test because one of our customers won't spend money with us unless we do. So they just try to get it done very, very quickly. And there is a cost associated with it. In the Grammatech article, they'll talk more about those costs. But yeah, we do see this as something that a lot of organizations don't do as often as they should. They think that these are the types of tools that a pen tester should be using, not something that's baked in every single day as part of the development process.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I'm somewhat saddened that more enterprises aren't kind of on the bandwagon of removing security bugs in development, moving that into QA. We interviewed someone recently. I forget who it was. I think it was James Jardine that talked about the importance of moving security testing into QA and how he's helping organizations do just that. And then, of course, it's also valid to have an external firm test it and have some protection in there, which is a separate topic. But it amazes me how many enterprises aren't doing that. And like you said, John, they just jump to, hey, we developed this app. Let's have a pen test. Like, how does that work out for a lot of organizations? Not too good, right?
It doesn't work at all. I mean, we just got done with a customer that said they've never had a test whatsoever. But then they start saying things like, well, we fully expect that we're going to come through really clean because our security, our developers are really good at what they do. I mean, look at the beards on these hipsters. These guys have got to be just fantastic developers, right? And then it just doesn't go well at all. So one of the things we've been doing, and Paul, we did a webcast on this, I think like a year and a half ago, where it was kind of like pen test preparations for web application assessments. And we're like, there's lots of free tools that you can use. They're not nearly as good as the commercial tools, but they're really great at finding that low-hanging fruit that you would be embarrassed about. Like if you have SQL injection in a URL and a get parameter, that's pretty bad. That's not something you want on the front page of the New York Times. But if you can take that low-hanging fruit off before you actually get to a pen test, that's helpful. And that's where these products help out. The one thing that is kind of weird, and I don't think NetSparker is this strange, is all of them are starting to go to a pricing model where it's how many targets you're testing. And it looks like Acunetics is actually doing this as well. They don't really do the Acunetics standalone as much as they used to. And it's good because they can make more money on it. But how do you take something like an Acunetics or Sensic and roll it out to 55 developers where they're testing their own code on their own instances before they roll it up to staging or QA? And I think that's the niche that something like Zeta Attack Proxy fits in very, very, very well, which means it costs nothing.
Yeah, I think there's other players in the space that focus more heavily on arming some developers with tools, and I think we should have a movement to build these tools into QA. I think largely, they're put in the hands of the security team, which may be two people, and they may have 1,000 applications.
Yeah.
And so that's why you see, the large cloud-based systems being able to do that. But, it needs to be baked into the whole process. And, if you're an enterprise and you're reading, some of these articles and you're like, oh, I should just go get a tool. No, application security is a whole thing that you need to have all of the proper planning. And yes, automated web scanners, such as the fantastic one from NetSparker, as Faru I can see is joining us now, are important, but it has to work into an overall program to be effective, because someone has to not just find those bugs, but someone also has to fix them. So it has to fit into your process.
And you want that to be as early in that process as possible. And I think that a lot of these...
That's what the Grammatech thing was saying, right?
Yep, absolutely. And I think a lot of these pricing models, and I forgot, Accunex does still have their on-prem, but their cloud-based subscription is selling it for scanning a target. And it's kind of like, well, we just want this to scan our external web application on a periodic basis. And there's absolutely value to that. But going back to the core, you need to put this in the hands of the developers, the systems administrators, and the security team all the way throughout the process.
Absolutely. BeyondTrust has an update for Power Broker for Windows 7.3, which is an endpoint privilege management solution. Very good product in the space, and they've made an update. I'm excited to see updates come out from a lot of vendors, especially in this space, as Black Hat is. We're just on the heels of Black Hat, or on the cusp of a lot of announcements for Black Hat. So. That helps IT admins manage rules and policy for end users, assets, and computers. And of course, we've talked about lots of different software solutions for this, BeyondTrust being one we haven't mentioned in a little while. So good to see an update from them. Well,
and this is a product that's been around in the space for a long time. They're doing a very, very good job of it. We see it implemented in some of our customer locations. And usually whenever the BeyondTrust is implemented and we're able to bypass BeyondTrust, it's because they screwed up and they didn't actually apply it to a certain jump host or some system somewhere that was missed. So these products have tremendous value for dealing with privilege management. I've kind of come around because I used to hate them, because years ago when we first started testing them, I think some of the NetIQ products from years ago, they had huge security vulnerabilities, and they actually made organizations less secure because of those vulnerabilities. Like using the same password on every single endpoint for the service when it starts up is just a bad architectural approach. But now with a lot of these vendors that are out there, they tend to do much, much, much better. You don't see these issues as much as they used to have. So yeah, this is cool, and it's kind of a nice little update on what they're actually doing. And this is also, when we're talking about marketing write-up, Paul, this is a good write-up.
Yeah,
it's not stupid. It's just basically get to the point, be factual, move on.
Yeah, and I think the next article from Duo Security also falls in that category. Obviously it's somewhat self-serving for Duo, which I kind of agree. If you're going to be a vendor in the space and you're going to write content, it should be somewhat it should educate the security community on various topics, but it should also tie back into your products too, because we want to know what problems you're solving. And Duo's been doing a good job with that. Their article, Security Hygiene, Prevent Malware Infection and Stop Lateral Movement, certainly a hot button topic today. They do a nice job of giving you an overview of some things to think about. And where it ties...
and there was only one paragraph in the entire article where they pimped their product.
Yeah.
Everything else was absolutely solid, rock solid advice.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, they talk about, well, you should train your users. And we have a product for that. So they do make ties. But, their article's spot on, and everything we've talked about, applying patches and user education and slowing lateral movement with least privilege, admin, limiting admin logins, password policies, and two-factor. Of course, they're going to have that in their article, being Duo.
And I can't argue with that. I think that's great advice. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so Coalfire, this is interesting, John. Coalfire is going to conduct adaptive penetration testing training at Black Hat. I didn't know Coalfire. I knew Coalfire did a lot on the compliance front, but they're actually doing some pen testing training at Black Hat.
Okay. So all of this is based on them buying Verus, right?
Oh, okay.
And this is actually this might be something more for Security Weekly than Enterprise Security Weekly, but I find this interesting. Coalfire purchases Verus Group because they really like the ATD, the Adaptive Threat Division, right? And then immediately after Coalfire purchases them, you see this huge exodus of all of the key people that are in that group that made that part of Verus so incredibly just stellar. And I think just yesterday, They just announced Spectre Ops. Did you see the Spectre Ops announcement?
No.
Yeah, so Raphael Mudge from Cobalt Strike has started up a consulting company, and for the record, they are absolutely a competitor to Black Hills Information Security. But you look at the people that are in them, and a lot of the people that are there are actually from the old Veris group. So you have Mudge, of course, and like Jason Frank, Michael Wright, who are some of the other people. Jeff Dimmock is there. So there's a Will Schroeder is moved over there as well. And I think that this is interesting because basically what exactly did Coalfire get if they purchased this company for this capability? And like all the people that made that capability rockstar and awesome left. And what they got was an amazing competitor now with Spectre Ops. So it's basically the point is take care of your employees or they might leave and start their own company.
Are you familiar with the SANS incident response survey results?
This was weird. No, which is strange because, I teach that class for SANS. But at any rate, no, I haven't had a chance to look at the results very much at all. I did look at some things like what technologies do they actually have implemented, and which is looking at that portion of the presentation as it came across. And the thing you'll see is that there is no unified front runner as far as what technological base is spread all over the place. It's basically scattershot and really, really frightening in the fact that we don't see any type of unification around certain types of technologies for incident response at all.
It's interesting. Threat Quotient published an article to round things out. And they did. There was a survey. Of course, a lot of this is dependent on how well or not so well the survey was published. 72%, according to the survey, believe cybersecurity is getting harder. I think that kind of speaks to your last point, John, about the solutions being kind of all over the place.
Well, and there's another kind of darker point I think that's lurking underneath this. I don't believe that security is getting harder. I think that we have a good idea of what we should be doing, and people have known what we should be doing for years. But what you're starting to see is this industry is exploding. You're getting a whole bunch of people in this industry that have only been in this industry for a year, maybe two tops. And let's be honest, Paul, if you could go back in time, knowing what you know now versus what you knew when you were working at the university, right. I am absolutely certain you would have done things differently. There's a tremendous amount of a learning curve associated with this industry. And I don't believe that security is getting harder. It's just that we're getting a lot more people in it that have really a long ways to go. And the core concepts, the core problems, the core solutions have always been there. It's just, I think that people are a little bit overwhelmed with just how hard it actually is.
Well, and I think too, you give me a time machine, right? One of the things, and I'm sure you fall in this camp too, right, John, is when you're implementing solutions, it's not so much that the solution isn't going to help solve the security issues. It's that your way that you effectively communicate that and convince people that they need to implement some security measures. That's the one thing that I think a lot of people miss that are coming into the industry. It's not so much technical knowledge. It's that knowledge of convincing your organization that they need to implement security measures and doing that on an ongoing basis.
And one of the problems I have with this, and this kind of goes to my intense hatred for threat intelligence feeds, is, this article talks about how people think it's getting harder, and they're like, well, threat intelligence is a cornerstone of any security organization. No, it's not. No, that's a garbage statement. Patching, keeping your systems up to date, firewalling, using application whitelisting if you can get to that point. Internet whitelisting is an absolute must. These are the foundational cornerstones of using long passwords. These are cornerstones. These are the things that lead to breaches every day. We never, ever, ever get stopped by somebody's cyber threat intelligence feed. It just does not come into play. So, and I feel like with these vendors, with all of these new people funneling into computer security, I think that it creates a massive vacuum for vendors that are selling absolute garbage and in many situations, total complete snake oil, to kind of step in and say, here's your single pane of glass. Here is your AI automation for your incident response, that they can sell this crap to these people that are new to the industry. And I think that that is a massive problem that we're going to have to deal with a little bit later on down the road.
Absolutely. Well, that rounds out the enterprise security news for this episode. We're going to take a short break even, and come back. See how I combine those two words there?
It's a break back.
It's a break back. Faro Mavatuna from NetSparker. Stay tuned.